Hello, in this video, I wanted to kind of continue on some of the conversation I was having on Baudrillard before, except for I kind of wanted to flip the conversation and talk about how I think policy teams can answer this argument when they're on the affirmative and Baudrillard's on the negative. Before, in the last couple of videos, if you didn't tune in, which you definitely should, go back and watch, I did one video kind of talking about just an introduction to Baudrillard if you've never really heard of it or wanted to know what are some of the central claims that Baudrillard makes and some of the ones that are most pertinent to the ones that you'll see in debate and maybe on the water resolution next year. And in this video, I kind of wanted to continue with this and then talk about basically the way in which I think teams can answer this argument a little bit better. I did a smaller series talking about how I think teams can answer the argument and execute it a little bit better when I did Baudrillard on the neg versus policy teams, and so I wanted to do the opposite video and talk about how I think teams can answer a little bit better. I think this video is obviously really important if you're just trying to answer or understand Baudrillard in general, and you should definitely go back to watch the other videos regardless from whatever stance that you're taking, just I think to get a better idea of really what this argument does and how it operates in different scenarios and different debates. And I think that there are a lot of things that you'll find in this video that are hopefully really helpful for you, and hopefully I'll be able to lay out some of the things that I think are kind of really important when considering this argument. I think this argument can definitely be something that's a bit tricky for people, or something that catches you off guard if you aren't prepared for it, because it could definitely be something, if you haven't studied postmodernism, that is really different and it's kind of thrown at you in a way that if you aren't really familiar with the terminology, or if you're really confused or haven't really gotten into the literature base, it can be really out of your basis. And so I definitely think it's really just a question of how you can take that and turn it into a skill that you use against things that are unfamiliar with you or against you in debate in general. And I think that's a skill that you kind of need regardless, and so maybe this video will help with that too. I think that the first thing that's important when you're thinking about trying to figure out how you should respond to Baudrillard or just to these types of arguments in general, you should always try to set your priority list to try to figure out what your priorities are and what the main thing you should think about when you answer these arguments. This can be hard to identify when you don't really know it's in the literature base, but I would try to think about trying to find things like common words or common phrases or common arguments that seem really strong and fluent throughout the argument that they're making. I would definitely try to figure out the role that different portions of the flow play in terms of trying to figure out what are the conditions for them to win, and what are the conditions for you to win, right? If you're able to prove the AF does X or Y, are you able to the AF wins, and kind of just setting a standard for how the debate will go down. And once you're kind of able to set a competitive frame for how the debate goes down, I think it's really just a question of how you kind of execute different portions of the flow that I'll kind of continue to talk about throughout the rest of this video. I think that when you're also setting your priorities for Baudrillard, it's really, really important to look out for this particular argument, if you have no context to it, to really look at how they use the thesis of this argument to kind of make the other arguments make sense, and how the thesis level arguments that they use are able to kind of create really intricate arguments throughout the rest of the flow and points of offense that kind of derive from one central set of claims that they'll kind of use as places to display arguments that you make all over the place. And so really centering places on how I'm talking about the thesis and ways that you'll see it in this video and the next are extremely important kind of moving forward. I think on the framing portion of the debate, it's really important when you're thinking about the framing portion of the debate to really think about the way in which you can figure out how to make sure that you can get to a level where the judge is at least thinking about your impacts and weighing the possible consequences of your impacts, even if that means that you don't get the full weight or that you automatically outweigh the impacts that the other team will inevitably make. You do definitely want to make you have the footing in terms of just the importance procedurally in thinking about your arguments, in terms of setting a standard for how the judge is able to evaluate debates, while also thinking about the ways in which you can think about the procedural value to that kind of standard, and think about the reasons why that procedural value may override some of the kind of critiques that they have of the role the debate serves as a whole. A lot of the arguments that Baudrillard want to make, that Baudrillard teams want to make, if you kind of listen to my other videos before, are arguments down the line of trying to win that there is this disconnect between the ability for us to actually produce information, and that information to be something that is used to actually persuade people into creating direct action, or the idea that the type of representation that we have in the media or that we're kind of given culturally and historically is the accurate depiction of the thing that has actually happened, or the event itself. And it plays on that kind of disconnect in order to win that there are kind of these impossibilities or these barriers that lay in place that stop the affirmative from actually being able to transform politics, and that kind of bankrupts the value that it has within debate as a whole. And I think that being able to talk through procedurally kind of like why, being able to evaluate the basis of the app even if you don't think that the app is like pedagogically valuable is good, and then still winning arguments starting early on in the debate in the framing page about why you just think the types of skills that you're getting and talking about generally in this portion are good is a good place to start this debate, because even if I don't think that's where you should center your offense or put all your offense, it is a good place I think for you to definitely put in a lot of arguments to start making explanations to the judge about why talking about politics or talking about policy is particularly important to how we think about the world and how we change current issues, and starting to make connections between debate and the outside world, which can really push the value of why your framework is really good. I think on the question of the thesis level portion of the debate, this is the place where you want to pull a lot of examples that I think can be really familiar if you know what type of examples that you are looking for, but it's really a question of like pinpointing what you think in the thesis you really want to like get rid of or you think is really problematic for your types of arguments. I think that when you're trying to get some ground on the types of these arguments that they're making, you should first start thinking about what are the ways in which public discourse or the way in which like public information has contributed to the way in which politics is formed. I would think to things like climate change, various politics surrounding race, gender, etc. All the things in which like very different types of public displays and public advocacy have made change to policy that is trackable to some point, even if debatable in terms of like how like effective it is. And I think being able to at least lay out some of that at the thesis level can give you some arguments about why the public and informing the public and thinking about how the public produces and understands policy is particularly important and pertinent to changing the world around us. And starting there not only bridges the gap between a lot of the arguments that you want to make about debate, but it will also kind of put you in a place where you're really getting at the thesis of the argument or the disconnect that they want to play on to make some of their kind of presumption level claims later, which I think will really help you later on. Additionally, with your thesis level arguments, you then kind of need to go on and make arguments about why like using the law and thinking about the law as a starting point for these things is particularly good. So why thinking through the kind of particular details of law and thinking through the minute details of law can really help us process and think about information that allows us to make specific demands that are like really impactful for thinking about like everyday types of impacts, even if this isn't the type of affirmative that you're reading in terms of the vein of like policy that you're reading. If you're reading a big stick app and these kind of examples come off in the soft left region, I still think that this really feels like something that you can use in terms of just proving why the kind of like framework that you're undertaking for politics as a whole is effective, and why it kind of produces a relationship to policy that is particularly helpful. And hopefully you'll be able to use some of this stuff in terms of framing some of the thoughts that we'll take into talking about the next video that we'll have in thinking about policy responses to Baudrillard. And hopefully this video was kind of helpful, at least getting you thinking about the ways and the priorities that you should set for this type of argument and how you're answering it. And hopefully you'll keep tuning in for more. Thanks.